Thank you for tuning into the Embodied Mother podcast. I am your host, Jacquelyn Page. Join me as I share my stories of my own experiences of moving through the threshold of motherhood and the wisdom that I have developed along the way. It is my hope that this is a space where mothers will walk away feeling empowered to embrace and nurture themselves and to feel grounded in their role as mother. Together, let's build the skills that will help you step into your sovereignty as mother and be the light and the pillar for your family. I can't wait to journey together. Hello, and welcome to the Embodied Mother podcast. I'm your host, Jacquelyn Page, and today's episode is going to really be a part two of last episode with Daniel Gross. And he shared his journey of fatherhood and family foundations and him really raising sons and the wisdom that he shared in his story. Wanted the opportunity to share my story as a wife and as mother. And really, I have recognized that I haven't even shared my evolution and my story of what has brought me here to who I stand as mother. And so really this episode is going to be about shining light into the essence of a woman, of what it means to be a sovereign woman in how we hold ourselves in marriage and in motherhood. And I'm going to shine a little light on raising daughters. As I've gotten to deepen into my feminine, I have begun to understand how to really connect and raise my daughter in a way that I feel aligns with the integrity of our family values. So, before we dive into all of that, I really wanted to share my story, my childhood. Hearing Daniel's story, it really began to awaken some self-reflection of my childhood and what I experienced that really shaped me in who I am as a woman in this world and as a mother to my family. And it it began really. Well, obviously, my childhood was my childhood, and I want to preface that my childhood was very privileged, and I had a beautiful upbringing into a family that was very close-knit. I had both my parents stayed together. I had three other siblings, and we lived in suburbia, and really my life felt great. And I also want to recognize that even though my life felt very great, I feel very grateful for my upbringing, how I was raised, and the things that I was able to do. I also want to understand or acknowledge, really, that there were elements that I experienced in my childhood that did have a weighing effect on my self-esteem and how I show up in the world and how I show up as a woman, as wife, and as mother. And it paved the way for my experiences in adolescence and young adulthood that that really began to create self-defeating stories that I carried about myself. And all that to say is, I can have so much gratitude for the way that I was raised, and I can also acknowledge the parts that happened that need to have some healing done around. And I know that my parents did the best that they could, and they were doing the best they can, and they gave us a beautiful life that was even different from their childhood. They took their own experiences and created their family in a way that, taking things that aligned with them and letting go of things that didn't. And so I acknowledge that that's exactly what I'm going to be doing as I raise my children, and they're going to be doing as they raise their children. And even before I dive into some pivotal experiences that I had as a young teenage girl growing up, I I have recognized that I went into the public school system, and that had a lot of weighing effects on my self-esteem. I took longer to grasp reading and writing. I remember going to after school tutoring. I remember just really disliking school. And there was a very big disconnect because I felt like everything that I did wasn't good enough to learn how to read and write. And I was really comparing myself to everyone else in my class. They're on these readers and that are, probably on their level. And here I was in the basic components of learning how to read. And I just remember this like feeling in my stomach almost every day of going to school of just dreading it and my stomach hurting because I wasn't as good as everyone else and school was hard for me. And these were the belief systems that I began to create about myself that really shaped how I saw myself as a young adult and as a woman coming into this world. And it's interesting because the memories that I remember about my childhood was that school was hard. I wasn't performing to the par of everyone else. And yet I went back and looked at artifacts I have in this, I don't know, like little timekeep box of pictures and report cards and art from when I was growing up. And I looked at my grades and they were like A's and B's. And so it's even interesting to look back at the facts of my childhood in comparison to my memories and even maybe they not be matching. And so I have begun to dive into why were my memories that I was holding on to creating a story that may not have been true for what was actually happening. And so all that to say is in my experience of going to school, it really began to shape how I saw myself in the world, which was not good enough, which was keeping myself small. I didn't want attention. I didn't want light on me. I didn't want to read out loud. I didn't want to answer questions in class because those were all opportunities for me to get something wrong. And that felt uncomfortable and it felt uneasy. And so I lived my childhood really in this space of stress and worry. I didn't know it was stress at the time, but like that stomach ache that I had all the time and just really dreading going to school. I remember crying some days of going to class, and I remember they would even bring my older brother in to comfort me because I was unconsolable. And so this was really what shaped how I saw myself in the world. So I have done a lot of rewiring that because I know that there was purpose for that. I have compassion for my younger self. I have so much tenderness and love and forgiveness for all of that. And I don't have to allow that little girl to shape who I am today. I can heal her and I can love her and I can show up as Jacquelyn, the woman, the divine woman that God created me to be in my life. And so I was experiencing that part of my childhood. And then in eighth grade, my mom was experiencing just a long period of not feeling well. She was tired, she felt sick, and she would have doctor's appointments. They would take blood work, and nothing would come back with answers. And I remember this was going on for months and months until finally she was like, no, I know that something is not right within me, and I'm not going to leave here until I find answers. And I remember it was Valentine's Day that she found out because my mom and dad would always have this lunch date together on Valentine's Day. And I remember my dad expressing that she had called him and that the doctor's appointment had basically led her to taking her to the hospital. And I did not know what was really happening at the time. I was just told that mom is sick, she needs to be in the hospital for a little while. And and that began to like really stir within me a lot of things that I didn't really know how to verbalize because my mom was no longer in our house. She was the pillar and the heart of our home. And so then I would be going home, and even before walking into the door of my home, just pulling into like the driveway, I could just feel the difference in how I felt in my body, knowing that my mom was not inside, knowing that she wasn't there. There was just this, the way that I can describe it is it felt like something was missing within me when my mom was at home. And I understand now that the energetics, that play that the mother has in the home, she is the heart of the home. She is the pillar that creates the foundation of the nurturing, the love, the compassion and the patience. And my mother, um, took on so much of the household that when she was gone, it was very apparent how much that how much she was really caring as a solo parent, not as a solo parent because they were together, but how much she was caring in the household duties and helping us with like schoolwork and doing the cooking, the cleaning. And when she was gone, all of these tasks needed to be done. And if they weren't done, then we weren't really functioning as a household. And so, even at a young age in eighth grade, I just began to take on these roles as mine. I began to provide help with cleaning, help provide with cooking meals and doing laundry and helping my younger brothers and sisters with their homework and school projects. And I remember just knowing that this was my job now. When my mom was in the hospital for months at a time, these things needed to be done. And yes, of course, my dad was there as also cooking and cleaning. I mean, it was very apparent how much my mom really did in our house when she wasn't there. And I began to just take on the role that she left, and I took ownership of being the mother in our home, which was a really interesting dynamic of having younger siblings and even an older sibling and taking on that role as mother. It really I feel like it almost took away from being able to be their sibling when I'm putting on the role as mother. It's a very different dynamic of even feeling like I needed to create consequences if things were, not followed through or things happened. And I remember, especially my younger sister, just being like, why can't you just be my sister and not be my mother? And that really hit me. And I was being everybody's mother and not their sister or daughter. And I didn't know how to, at the time, to disentangle sister and mother. I didn't know I was even taking on the role of mother. I just began to do the things that needed to be done in our home. And my mother, my mom, she was a fierce warrior. She had a heart and a will to live. And I didn't know it at the time, but looking back and learning more about this whole experience, when my mom had that appointment that took her to the hospital, I learned later that she was diagnosed with leukemia and that she would have about 3 months to live because of how fast it had grown and how much it had taken over her bloodstream and her body. And I didn't know the severity of all this. A lot of this was kept from us. I think just to protect us too, because they didn't even know what was happening and going on. And I remember I did find out overhearing a conversation, a phone call that I wasn't supposed to hear, that my mom had cancer. And that was just like, I felt like a bomb had just exploded over my life and my heart and my being. I didn't know how to process this. And a part of me felt hurt that this wasn't shared, and confused why they just kept saying that she was going to be in the hospital for a little while and then come back home. But hearing the word cancer was such a trigger moment for me that made me, as a little young teenager, begin to conceptualize so much more of what was happening. Oh my gosh, cancer. What does that mean? Is she going to live? What is happening? She she had a will to live, and she fought with every ounce of fiber that she had, and she was put in remission. And it felt like a miracle had occurred that she had such a strong will to live and to survive this and fight this that she did fight it, and she was in remission. I was definitely feeling the weight of the lack of her presence. I'm a young teenager. I don't have my mom there to like guide me into womanhood, and really I was beginning to navigate this on my own, I guess just taking on what I saw in TV and movies, from my friends, from magazines, that of what I thought woman is meant to do and meant to be. And these were such foundational years in my life that I was living in and I was experiencing with this duality of being a teenager while also playing the role of mother. And the things from the generation before me of what I was taught as mother is self-sacrificing, is doing for others before you do for yourself, of not really having a role model to show me how to take care of myself. And so I began to take on that role with ease. Getting the value, getting to feel valued and important, and getting validated from helping others, from giving to others, from doing so much for other people. I began to get validated. And so then it almost felt good to be doing all of these things and creating this story of I have to do this. And I remember people commenting how much I looked like my mom, how much I resembled her, my mannerisms, the way I stand, the way I talk, the heart of who I was matched my mom. And looking back, I can see how easily I slipped into this self-sacrificing mother role because that is what was modeled for me. I remember that after my mom had passed, my grandmother would reminisce, and she had this one memory, and it would bring her to tears of going to the doctor's appointment with my mom and the doctor asking her, why didn't you take care of yourself? Like all of this blood work is showing like such a lack of depletion. Why didn't you take care of yourself or take vitamins or do the things for yourself? And my grandma would break down because my mom's response was, I have 4 children to take care of. How do I take care of myself when I need to provide for them? And I don't carry a lot of memories from my childhood, but this memory with this conversation has really struck me as a very core memory for myself that I had with my grandma. Because what I recognized was that's exactly what I took on. That's exactly the role and the way I thought mother was meant to be, was just doing for everyone. And I really did get my validation from that. And so it felt very strange as I became a mother to recognize quickly that that is not a sustainable way to live. If you are giving so much of yourself to other people, to your children, to your community, for others, it begins to create a life where I am in survival and I'm reactive and I have a harder time embodying vitality and energy and patience and joy and all these core foundations that I want to embody in how I show up as wife and as mother. And My mom went into remission, and it was I don't have a clear timeline. From what I remember, being months of maybe even a year or two of just going back to life as quote unquote normal. My mom would come home. Um, I remember at one point she went back to work. And so it just looking back, I can see how we just slipped back into living a way that we were always living and operating in a way that we always operated because that's what we knew as our normal. And I don't I don't cognitively remember like shifts and changes that were made in the way she took care of herself, in the way she took care of us. She just had such a heart for being a mother that she gave to us endlessly. And she got leukemia again. And I remember, I don't know if this was the second time it came back or the third time, and just feeling defeated that this was happening again, that she was going to be leaving our home again, that the heart of our home would be gone again. And I'm recognizing the grief that I felt at that moment was also the grief of my teenage life, like slipping away, because I recognized that in that moment I was going to have to step up as mother again and take on this role. And it must have been the second time because by this time I was driving. And so not only was I helping cook and clean, I was also being chauffeur to my younger siblings' sports functions and taking them to practices and taking them to hang out with friends. And I can look back now and see that I never really grieved my feeling like my teenage years were taken from me. And not that they were taken from me. Obviously, all of this was a choice, but I can see now that there needs to be some grieving of that experience. And, because my mother had such a will to live, she fought with every ounce that she had, and she was in remission again. And like I said, the timeline is a little unclear of how long she had in between each one, because it was about a 4-year span of when she was first diagnosed to when she passed. And so, then she would be in and out of the hospital getting her treatments, and then going into remission. And then the third time she was diagnosed again, it felt like a big bomb because here we go again. It was like this cycle of feeling like we were going to have our mom back and things were going to go back to normal and that we could go on as a family again. And then she would get diagnosed. And I remember that the last time that she was diagnosed, it was, I remember it being like harder on her body. And they ended up, even trying a blood transfusion, and we had a lot of hope that it was going to be very successful. And it was so identical that her body didn't fight it the way it was supposed to. It just accepted it as her own. And so it didn't work the way that they had hoped. And there was a lot of naivety in me just thinking that things were going to be fine. And I remember it was Thanksgiving and we hosted Thanksgiving at our house, even though my mom was, going through recovery and having chemotherapy. And I remember just her looking so weak, doing some cooking and, preparing our home for others to join us. And I remember that night seeing how much it took a toll on her. And they ended up deciding to go to the hospital that night. And she had a hard time coming back after that. And then she got sick with pneumonia. And finally, one day, my dad called me and said, Mom is really sick. You need to come to the hospital. And so I remember waking up my siblings and we went to the hospital and just like seeing my dad's face when we walked in of the sorrow that he was going to have to break that news to us. I'll never forget that look. And it was just a few days later that we were surrounding my mom saying goodbye and then living my life without my pillar, without the heart of our family. Felt so different. It felt like a piece of my whole self was missing. And now that I've become a mother, I can see that parent, that mother-child dyad, it never goes away. Even as your children grow, I can speak from experience of when my mom was not home, I instantly felt it in my body. And even though I was a teenager and, becoming a young adult, I strongly felt that missing piece within me that she was no longer here. And um, so I can speak to that of feeling that as a child and now feeling that as a mother of this symbiotic relationship with mother and child is so strong. It's so strong. And it's felt. It's so felt. And if you're a mother, you know exactly what I'm talking about because you can be across across the room, across the neighborhood, across the state from your children, and yet there's this connection that is always lived within us. And so here I am, my senior year of high school, finishing off my senior year without my mom, graduation without my mom. I didn't really recognize the missing component of my life and how much that made an impact on my life until I became a mother. Because becoming a mother without your mother to lean on felt like that whole experience of grief just came to the surface of that missing element. Like I'm not meant to become a mother without my mom being here to support me and guide me. And as I as I began to journey into motherhood, all of these ways of being came to the surface. All of these self-sacrificing ways of operating just really came to the surface. It was like, oh, I remember. I remember all of this. This is exactly what I did when my mom was in the hospital and sick. And it didn't really end there. Even when I went into college, I was asked to stay home to be here to support my brothers and sister. And that's what I did. I just did it. And I knew no other way until I became a mother and recognizing the lack of sustainability of this way of living, of what I can verbalize now is that when there's not, when there's this missing element within myself that can feel self-fulfilled within myself, when I am living in my purpose, when those elements are not there, when I know how to fill my buckets up to bring vitality, I can begin to quickly ignore that part to dive so much of myself into motherhood that it feels like this escapism that I'm doing such a great job mothering this little sweet baby of mine and to allow myself to be all consumed in my role as mother. And to give and give and give and give to this baby and begin to ignore my own needs, begin to ignore the needs of my marriage, begin to ignore that really I have poured so much into mothering that that has become my identity, that I don't really know my identity outside my role of mom and mother. And when that happens, when we start to create our story that is tied to our role as something, not me, myself as Jacquelyn, as a woman, it begins to create enmeshment. And when I'm getting my validation from mothering rather than getting my validation from my own internal self-fulfillment and my relationship with God, it begins to create it begins to create patterns and systems and habits that really are not sustaining, and they're really not healthy when I am attaching so much of myself to my child that I don't know who I am separate from mother. You can see how that can create some enmeshment. And then because of the way I was operating in that way, that was really showing up in my marriage of wanting to parent a certain way, wanting to do things a certain way, and just feeling like that is the only way and not having conversations about it and not pouring into my marriage in a way that feels life-giving. I can see how quickly I ignored and abandoned a thriving marriage to get my validation and needs met through being a mother. And what I can speak to from my own experience was that had tremendous effects on one, like my mental health and my relationship with my husband. And because I didn't know how to take care of myself, I didn't know what a thriving body felt like because I hadn't created these systems and habits in place to know how to take care of myself. That became like screaming red flags as I became a mother. Here, this infant is solely relying on me, and I don't even know how to take care of my own self, which I thought I did. And I quickly learned that I didn't know how to take care of myself fully, that I didn't know what thriving meant and felt like. I didn't know how to cultivate that. I quickly had to begin to deconstruct these belief systems of unworthiness, of self-sacrificing, of getting my needs and validation met from external sources of a mothering, of giving to others. I began to see how I was a big pillar and component of the reality I was creating in my marriage, specifically. Because if I cannot take care of my own self and have a healthy mental state, I began to like place all of this expectation on my husband. I can't expect my husband to fulfill my needs if I don't even know how to fulfill my own needs. And so it began to just be this very toxic, for lack of better words, dynamic of expecting all of this fulfillment and validation to come from my husband. And that's just such an unrealistic thing to place on my husband. And I really wanted to speak upon this because recognizing that I began to have beliefs and patterns, or not beliefs, but like I began to have thoughts that grass was greener on the other side, that maybe it was my husband who was creating all of this misery in my life when really it was all coming from within. And I really wanted to speak on this because I appreciated Daniel's message on how he is showing up as husband and as father. And also, my old self, when I was not taking responsibility of how I was showing up in marriage, I would hear an episode like that and I would quickly begin to place blame on my husband. I would say, "You're not showing up, you're not doing X, Y, and Z." And I would just blame, blame, blame. Or I would hear this podcast and I would instantly send it to him so that he would get all of this information to be a better person, to be a better husband, to show up differently as father. And I wasn't taking responsibility for myself and my own needs of getting of understanding how to fill my bucket. And I really started to begin to take ownership when I was having these thoughts of grass is greener and maybe a different marriage would work better. Maybe we just need to separate. Maybe we're not meant to be together. Maybe God got it wrong and we were not supposed to get married. And honestly, having those thoughts and being home by myself and not being in a very stable mental, like just component. I was eating in a vegan lifestyle. I was honestly probably very malnourished in the nutrients that I was needing. And so it was very easy for me to spiral in my head to place blame outside of myself. And it wasn't until I began to take radical self-responsibility of, wait a second, I need to learn how to take care of myself better. I need to learn what it feels like to feel good in my body, in my mind, in motherhood, and in marriage. And I began to take steps on cultivating rhythms like sunlight outside when the sun is rising, eating breakfast outside, moving my body, eating differently. I began to incorporate animal products back into my diet. I began to just journal. And instead of putting focus and blame on my husband, I just began to get curious about what was my part in all of this? How was I beginning to cultivate a marriage that didn't feel life-giving and didn't feel like we were in unity. It felt so much like we were on separate worlds trying to operate and make choices when we never could agree on anything, when we were just, bickering at each other, and it just wasn't what I pictured. When you choose to marry someone, it's not what I pictured. And honestly, a lot of what I saw from other people, from movies, from TV, from friends, from what was modeled to me and other people. That's what marriage looked like. It looked like coasting. Just like we're getting by. We love each other. We're operating. And I think that this is where a lot of those self-numbing things can come in to not fully see and accept the reality that you're living in. Because I used to, right, my escapism was diving so much into motherhood, and then it was maybe so consuming a lot of TV, or and then I did end up going back to work for a little bit as a school counselor. And in doing that, it honestly it felt like this catalytic moment to get very clear on how to take care of myself. If I'm going to be working and that requires so much of my energy to be outside of the home, I need to be so diligent on my self-care. And so really it was like this shakeup in my rhythm where I was like, all right, I'm going back to work. I need to like pack meal prep. I need to work like what gym am I going to be going to so I can take care of myself? How am I going to make sure that I'm getting the sunrise? I had bought these red lenses and I was wearing them to work uh, until the sun would come up. I would utilize windows instead of the fluorescent lights. I was at a split campus and one of my offices, or I was a counselor on two campuses, so I was like a split counselor. And one of my offices did not have windows, and I about had a heart attack when I walked in. And I was like, I'm not going to use these. So I brought lamps into my office to like put around the room so that we had enough light to not be using the overhead lights. And so it was like this shakeup in my rhythm to start creating these self-care rhythms and habits. And I got deeper in my prayer, I got deeper in journaling. I was doing a lot of self-help type of like audiobooks or reading, and it was um it was very eye-opening how when I stopped placing blame and focus on my husband on the things that were illuminated within myself of how I was creating my own self-perpetuating misery. And I was like, oh, it's not just my husband. Oh, I have a lot to do with this. And what I have recognized as women that there is an essential component in our nervous system to feel safe. And when my husband and I were in this disconnect and we weren't like in rapport, we weren't, in alignment with how we were living and operating and parenting, I began to feel unsafe in the sense of, let me see if I can explain this because it has become clearer and clearer and clear that even when there's like a decision that's happening and I think one way and he thinks another way, I begin to feel that dissonance already occurring. And it feels unsettling and it feels shaky. So I begin to close my heart to protect myself because I don't like this feeling. And really, when I begin to close off my heart, it puts a more barrier between my heart and my husband's heart, which creates more disconnect and more separation. And so when I began to get clear on, I feel more safe in my body and in my mind, and I have more energy and vitality when we're in rapport, then I'm going to make sure that I can do whatever I can on my part to communicate with my husband my needs of this safety. Because as soon as I began to get clear and verbalize this to my husband in a way that he can understand what's happening in my mind and my body, he was, of course, so willing and so ready to make the shifts and changes so that we are on the same page because it was like night and day difference with like this little stickiness and hiccup that we just recently experienced. And I'm not perfect in how I show up in marriage. I believe that marriage and parenting is this big mirror that is reflecting back to ourselves of the things that want to be healed and the things that God is calling upon us that is maybe not in alignment of showing up with full integrity. So it's going to be this signal constantly that's reflecting back to us on the parts of ourselves that need to be healed. And so where was I going with that? I um I have begun to get very clear on when I'm feeling this disconnect, how am I playing a part of this? How am I showing up in a way that isn't with an open heart, that is inviting to my husband? And I can see myself even in the interview of hearing Daniel take so much his own self radical responsibility of how he was showing up as husband and as father, that I even began to like feel those components of, oh, well, maybe Jeremy should be doing these things. And it was interesting of how far I've come from that pattern, and yet I still felt a little element of within me of feeling that way. And so I have recognized that, yes, when I'm in rapport with my husband, I have more energy to show up in the way that I want to in marriage and the way I want to in motherhood. When I feel this very deep, intimate connection with him, I feel very safe and protected by him and his love. And that honestly feeds me and my heart. It gives me energy to do all of the things that I want to do. And it's been an evolution of mothering in a way that emptying the dishwasher felt like the biggest chore in the world to doing that with ease every single morning before breakfast is even cooked. And now, having the energy and have cultivated a life where I can do that with ease, that I'm able to homeschool my two children, that I'm able to create and give life into this podcast, that I can home cook all of our meals from scratch. And that has been an evolution. Like I said, the dishwasher task, we used to have a sign that said dirty and clean because of how hard it was for me to do that every day, that I had to have a sign so people knew like this is still dirty or this is clean now. And now it's funny to look back at how I used to operate and see that. And so this really ties in full circle to how I'm showing up specifically as a mother with my children. I talked a little bit about, my dynamic with my son and seeing him begin to pull away from me. And, Daniel mentioned that that requires a grief. And that really hit me in the episode because I got curious if I've really allowed myself to grieve that. And beginning to give myself that time and space to grieve this separation with my son because I have seen patterns of when mothers don't allow that healthy separation that they um just speaking back to how I first began to operate as a mother that I had so much self-identity in being a mother, especially to my firstborn, which is a boy, and so my son. And I can clearly see from, experiences around me that if I hold on and don't allow that healthy detachment from my son, that is going to show up in the way he begins to identify himself in the world as a young boy and as a young man and in the way he's going to show up as husband and father for his children if he still has this attachment that was never allowed to be released and severed. you know um it was very eye-opening to hear that grief, um but how necessary that is for him to show up and begin to create his own identities that aren't tied to me, that are tied to his divine creation that God created him to be. But I really wanted to give time and space for raising daughters, um, and raising daughters in a way that feels an integrity. And, one of the things that I mentioned was how much people said that I used to look like my mom and how my aunt had a hard time seeing me after she passed because I looked so much like her. It would bring her to tears. People told me I looked like her twin. We were spinning images of each other. And it's funny because we celebrated her anniversary and I had a picture of her for this little like family gathering that we were doing. And I brought the picture from her wedding and everyone was like, oh, she looks like X, Y, and Z, or I can really see so and so in this picture. And no one, not one person said how she looked like me. And it was a very grounding experience to have love that this was my mother and this was who imprinted on me. And also, I have begun to um, detach myself from that self identity as needing to be her, of allowing myself and accepting myself for who I am without needing to be her or being her mini me or being a version of her, that I no longer get compared to her anymore. I've begun to have my own identity of who I am as Jacquelyn, as a woman, as a wife and mother, without the I see how I severed our ties. I severed the tie of the belief systems and the patterns and the ways of being that was perpetuating a cycle that was unsustainable. And what I allowed was to allow her love to be an imprint for me to show up as my own divine um, creation of woman. And it was a really humbling experience to be like, wow, I've been doing this work to to be me and not to be her, that people don't even compare me to her anymore. And one of the things that I have recognized in growing up of feeling, really a lack of self-worth and getting my needs met from outside sources and external validation, that I had resisted the component of feeling beautiful and radiant and how God created me in his image and really seeing that the essence of woman is in a radiance. We are meant to inspire. We are meant to embody vitality and radiance and allow that to shine from our feminine nature. We are creative. We create life. The life in this world would not be possible without woman, without who I am. I hold so much beauty in this world. And when I had my daughter, I got very triggered by people only acknowledging her beauty. Oh, she's so beautiful, pretty girl. And like it was this activation within me that I even created a boundary. And I was like, could we not call her my dad has this beautiful name if he calls me pretty girl, and that is how he acknowledges me. And in my own wound itself, I was putting a barrier and I was like, I don't want her to be called that. I want her to like let all of her qualities shine. And I was thinking that I was doing her a justice of not only commenting on her beauty and her looks, but really that was from my own wound of not feeling beautiful in myself. And I remember having a conversation with my dad and being like, yeah, that was not in integrity. And I love that you have called me pretty girl, and I want that for her. And I do not want to be the one who puts a barrier of letting her radiance shine into the world. Who am I to stop people from calling her beautiful and radiant? And it was such a pivotal moment for me as recognizing my feminine essence and raising a daughter to embody her own feminine essence. I want her to feel the beauty that God created her to be in. And it was that was a very humbling moment for me to recognize, was like, oh, I was stopping that. I was stopping that, her own mom. And it's just been a very humbling experience having a son and a daughter, because what I have recognized is people tell me my daughter looks so much like me, and I hold that to the utmost integrity. If she is still mirroring me, in her impressionable years, then I want to stand in integrity with who I show up as a woman, because I am modeling to her what that looks like. And I hold sacred my own self-care routine, because to me, self-care isn't just this selfish thing. I think truly self-care is this selfless thing that I can do, this loving thing I can do for my family, because when I take care of myself and fill my own bucket and know what it feels like to be fulfilled, I am modeling that for my children. I'm modeling this this healthy way of being. And not only that, I'm showing up in the best possible way to have the patience and the nurturing love and compassion and the energy to be the wife and mother that I desire to be, that God created me to be. And so when I was listening to the phases of boyhood that Daniel was sharing, I so much relate to those for girls as well, the different ages. I've really studied the Waldorf homeschool, and Rudolf Steiner has outlined different changes that children go through. There's like the 3-year change, the 6-year change. So there's the changes in groups of three, but then the big changes happen in the 7-year marks, which, if you know astrology at all, is very interesting because that's when Saturn has its return. So no wonder we're going through these 7, 14, 21, 28-year changes, these Saturn returns that were really almost like pivotal moments of like redefining who we are and how we show up in this world. Um, but what I've recognized is for girls, as they begin to like sever in that 3-year mark, that they begin to see that there's like this whole outside world. And for girls, they really need to anchor into safety of home. They need to anchor into the very tight-knit connection between mother and daughter or father and daughter, and really just being able to be held by the protection and love of the family unit, because it can be a very scary thing to be like, my world is my family, to now recognizing, oh, there is an outside world. And so that 0 to 3 is the baby, the nurturing, the love, just like he described for boy. I would say that is symbiotic for both boy and girl. And really the element, I see all of those phases with both of my children. My daughter's only 4 right now, but yeah, I think she's like in that challenger phase. And also when that is happening, she is like doing things that is pushing away from the family, but that can feel disconnecting. And I can describe that as the same exact feeling that I have if my husband and I are not on in rapport with one another. And so I can begin to feel the unsafety I feel in my body when I feel disconnected from my husband. And so I have recognized so deeply that that is what my daughter is feeling when she is making choices that push away. She still needs to be feeling that very much, that love protecting her. She needs to feel that reconnection with us, that she is needing to, that we as the adults have to really anchor into our nervous system, of not allowing our nervous system to be rattled by what she's doing. And I think that goes for both boys and girls. We are, as the adult, have to establish a baseline, or nervous system baseline that isn't so easily triggered and rattled by the choices, decisions, and the behaviors that our children are partaking in. And specifically, like my daughter will do a lot of actions that create separation, and it requires so much strength and within me to bring my nervous system back to safety, to say, I know that I'm safe, I know that I'm the adult, and I know that she needs my help in this moment. And so creating skills in ways of helping her during this. And I know that's going to be essential ever so more when she moves into that 7 year change of really pulling away to find her own identity, and then especially more in her teenage years. And what I've recognized is, these experiences right now are going to be a mirror for, our experiences in teenage years or young womanhood, and what that looks like. And what I can say is, I have to feel so secure in myself as woman, wife, and mother to be able to, you know, work through these tension moments without letting myself get so worked up and activated, and to feel safety within myself that I have self-cultivated to help her through that. And I will say the other element of young girl and woman is educating on our bodies, honestly, obviously for both genders. But for me, I have really normalized, having my bleed and what that means for me every month. I have begun to honor that when I'm on my bleed, I have less energy, and to verbalize my needs to the family unit during that time of my cycle, so that she is beginning to mirror and learn, oh, when I have my period, this is what this means. And to really recreate, not only for myself, like this is self-healing, because this was not taught to me when I first started my period. So I'm beginning to embody the different parts of my cycle in such a way that I want her to be modeling for her what it looks like at the parts of our cycles where we have more energy, where we can plan more things or do the things that we have the energy for, and then learning the parts of our cycles and bodies that feel more inward, that feel quieter and slower, and to teach her to listen to the signals of her body. Our bodies are so um, miraculous in self-healing and in what they're telling us, the messages that they begin to tell us. And so for me as a woman, I've begun to embody what that looks like so I can model for her healthy ways to have relationship with her body and her cycles. And if this is all new for you, I actually do have a Sacred Cycles Flow with Life course that teaches women and young girls the different phases of your cycle, what that means, what that looks like for your body, what can be happening. And I have priced it at a way that is very attainable for anybody that is needing more education on learning to live in flow with your cycle. And I think for me, as a woman and a feminine being, what I have recognized is when I'm living my life in flow of relinquishing, like surrendering really to the flow that God has created, to surrendering to the flow of my husband and our marriage and in motherhood, and also to the flow of my children's needs. When I begin to release control, I have begun to feel so much more peace and fluidity and joy begin to cultivate in our family unit. I have recognized that when there's spaces that I am trying to control my children, trying to control my husband, trying to control our family rhythms, it's really from a space of fear and lack. And that is an opportunity for me to get curious about what that is coming from within that I feel like I have to control rather than trust. And it's been in the de-armoring of my heart to feel more trust in God, to feel more trust in my husband, and trusting in myself and how I'm showing up and trusting um, my children. And so I really invite you, if you are a mother, or even if you are a husband or a male listening to this, is to get curious on how to cultivate safety for the women, for ourselves, for mother, for our young daughters in our home. What does that look like for her to feel so safe? What are things that as a woman, I need to get clear on my needs to express that in a way that my husband or my children can understand that my needs of safety. And I invite you, I invite you to really deepen into that question of curiosity. What do I need to feel safe? What do I need to feel safe in my marriage? What do I need to do to feel safe in the way I parent? And what do I need to do to feel safe in my home dynamics? If you are a woman and newer on this journey of coming back home to yourself, I invite you to go and check out that that online offering I have. It's an evergreen offering, so you can purchase it at any time. I made it accessible so that anyone can go through that. It also has a tracking journal for you to track the different signals of your body throughout your cycle. I have gotten to be such a researcher of my body, my minds, my sleep patterns, my moods, my energies on the different days of my cycle. And it has given me so much clarity on myself and my needs through the different phases of my cycle. What kinds of foods that I need? What kind of movement do I need? What kind of self creative do I need to be participating in to feel vitality in all aspects of my life? And so I really hope that this episode gave you insight into how to take self responsibility as a wife and as mother, because I love Daniel's sharing on how he does that as man and as father and as husband of his family. And I wanted an opportunity to shine light on how women, how we can do that for ourselves. And really, I believe this whole podcast is a roadmap to that. And if you haven't listened to other episodes, I encourage you to go back to season one because season one is setting the foundation. I talk all about nervous system repair. Season two is about creating our environment and cultivating rhythms that are life giving for us. And season three was really about the sovereign woman way of living. And then season 4 has felt very much into deepening those relationships with God, with ourselves, with our partners, with our family, with our community, with the land around us. So stay tuned, because now that we have touched upon uh, family dynamics, we're going to be talking about a next episode about effective communication with one another. And then we're going to be diving into cultivating and deepening with the land around us. So I encourage you to like and subscribe to this podcast so you don't miss another episode of deepening our relationships, so that we can live a life that feels so fulfilling to us. So I would love to hear your takeaways of this episode or any of the episodes you've listened to. So please feel free to message me on Instagram, to share in your stories, to write a review. Those things really fill me up and give me the motivation to continue on this journey. But until next time, I'm sending you with much love and blessings. Thank you so much for tuning in today. It has truly been an honor to walk alongside you and share my journey of motherhood with you. If you feel connected with this episode, I would just so love if you could leave a rating and a review. This really helps the podcast grow so that it can reach other mothers and women along this journey. And I always love hearing your takeaways and your interactions with this podcast. So if you ever feel called to share on Instagram and social media, be sure to tag me at the.embodied.mother so I can connect with you and your takeaways from this podcast. Until next time, I'm sending you with so much love and blessings on your journey in this life.